I think this is a pretty good demonstration of how reader donations, between the subscription panel and the panel we just heard, reader donations are such an important and growing factor in the important revenue that media need to produce. But I think we're also moving now into a conversation that'll go beyond that into some of the other things as well. All of you talked about multiple revenue, or at least maybe I'll start with you, April, talking about multiple revenue sources. Have you ever enumerated how many revenue sources you have at the Texas Tribune?
Well, I shared at first probably the largest segments, everything from foundations to corporations, members, and individual givers. But yeah, we have probably 10 different revenue streams, and the 10th is I call other, which I think is super interesting. And that's everything from rideshare roundups and different opportunities that don't require a lot of heavy lifting, but bring revenue to the Texas Tribune.
Yeah.
So Speakers Bureau is another one. I run that. Our guys were out representing the brand all the time. It takes a lot of time out of the newsroom and to prepare and present. And Evan Smith came to me and said, will you run the Speakers Bureau? And it was really the last thing I wanted to do, is be a calendar keeper. And I said, I'll do it on one condition. And he said, what's that? And I said, I will do it if you allow me to give sponsor benefits. And that way we can form a relationship with these great organizations that are asking y'all to speak. And he says, okay, do what you want to do. And now it's turned into a $250,000 business for us. And the beauty, and that's just on the speaking fee alone. I mean, if we went and looked at the data on the relations that it's built ongoing, it's pretty amazing.
I
So
love
you just have to be creative.
$250,000 here, $250,000 there. Pretty soon it's real revenue. At SembraMedia, we found all these different ways. We kind of found two paths. One of them is, driving a lot of audience and either getting a lot of subscription and donors from that, or that's where advertising starts to really come in, or a more loyal audience that will give you donations, will come to events, will hire you for the services you offer. You are fiercely anti-advertising, Rob. Tell me why you reject that completely.
Wow. When I first talking about that 5 years ago, especially here, then the next question always was, are you a communist? No, I'm not.
They were just trying to get you to sign up.
Yes. Advertising, well, first of all, it distracts literally. So we love the fact that we are a distract-free platform. It also simply puts another stakeholder in your business model. There's nothing really inherently wrong with ads, but the fact that we just don't have to think or have to put any energy in thinking of how do we please third-party businesses with the attention of our readers just frees up all the time to focus on those readers themselves. It's not that there's all kinds of indirect influence from ads that go into the journalism. No journalist will listen to an advertiser and say, oh, I'm going to write literally what he's saying. But clickbait, sensational headlines, seeing it as an attention game instead of informing people. That all is gone if you just are very principled about it. No ads, no sponsors, no sponsored content, etc.
I want to jump in just real
quick.
Please. I think it's all about the advertisers, the sponsors that you bring to your site. I mean, at the Texas Tribune, I see our sponsors as resources of great information. And I'm not trying to compete with our team's content. It's amazing. It's the gold. It's why people are there. I just want our offerings to be compatible with that and also create really a greater experience because, for example, I mentioned before we do tons of events. Other people come to our events and they say, we want these people at our events too. And so we build event marketing campaigns for them. And we find that, yes, it works and our people fill their rooms and they're happy and it's great. But without them being able to market to our audience, those people would never know that those event opportunities even exist. So I think it really has to do with how you're connecting your sponsors or your advertisers with your content and your brand.
Absolutely. Christina, I want you to jump in here. You, when you were at the Voice of San Diego, I think really helped champion a shared resource between the Texas Tribune and Voice of San Diego. And I know it comes down to the customer relationship management system they use that really helps drive those small donors into the bigger and bigger. And we're talking about people who start at $10 or $20 a month and end up making 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 and more contributions. You don't have to set a limit. How do you get people to move that, and talk a little bit about how you share that person?
So we share a database director. Her name is Anna. She is a Salesforce wizard. And I think, I think all of our clients in the Texas Tribune, we're really grateful to have somebody like that. And it, comes down to economy of scale, and that's one of the reasons why we created the hub. If multiple organizations are able to share a resource, it can go that much farther. If, Anna is making an investment or an update in Salesforce, that means 15, 16 organizations get to benefit from that. But for organizations that don't have this, great person, there's still a lot of great examples of people who will go out on their own and try to find their own resources and try to learn the work. So, yeah.
It's great. And Anna is a displaced Texan, so that helps. For us, our original CRM was not great. It was clunky. The sales team kind of went rogue at the Texas Tribune. We wanted Salesforce. Everybody said you can't afford it. Our operating partner, she did some research and found out as a nonprofit, you can apply for a grant to use Salesforce for free. And so we did it. And we did it kind of on the sly. And then we started to understand the power of Salesforce. And the whole company came together and decided that this was the way to go. And we tried to get a person in Texas, and we couldn't find anyone as great as Anna. And it's been wonderful because where Voice of San Diego was super powerful and successful, those was areas that we could learn from them. And hopefully we brought success your way as well through this relationship.
I think that's a wonderful model for others. If your media company isn't big enough to have a full-time person supporting everybody, keeping track of everybody else, shared resources can be a really powerful way to go. We have a question from the audience. Please, come on down.
Hi there. Jonathan Groves from Drury University. And I just wanted to thank you for your transparency and all the information and insights you're willing to share with us, because it's very valuable. I wondered if you had done a demographic breakdown of your membership to see if you're missing any segments of your community, and what are you doing to reach out to those segments that don't seem to be participating in the memberships?
Great question, April and Christina. I think both of you can.
The data that we've been collecting is related to news consumption habits and more around who is opening what newsletters and how frequently in their engagement. I think for some of the local news organizations, you can track, by region or geography and see if the editorial content is aligning with what you could really tap into. I used to run the events program there, and we would use events as a vehicle to market ourselves to neighborhoods that we didn't have a strong presence in. So, but as far as data goes, not necessarily what you traditionally might think of, age, gender, this sort of thing, but news consumption habits.
Go ahead, Rob.
Well, no, I'm going to probably give a different answer, because we don't collect demographics at all. We have in our founding principles, we have a privacy principle. We don't want to know your age or your location or how much you read us. We want to know what you know, and that's where the platform comes in. But we don't sell. That's one other reason why we don't sell ads, because then it becomes interesting. Is this the group 20 to 28-year-olds who have these and these incomes or stuff like that? If you don't have ads, you're really not that interested in that. So we only collect the data we legally are obliged to collect, and that's it. And let's face
By that you mean payment information?
like payment information, and for example, email, and so username, password, stuff like that, so they can log in. But not on what kind of group do we think you belong to. It states in our founding principles, we see you as curious individuals, not as part of some demographic.
And we take a very similar approach that we collect the absolute minimum amount of data during the sign-up process just to make it as easy as possible. And we find if the news organizations are trying to increase their impact with certain communities, it's much more subjective. So it's not about necessarily data collection on their audience. It's about looking like, where's the biggest impact with particular stories and what topic areas are they covering? So it's much more open-ended rather than hard data. Yeah.
I was just interested in it because in our community in Springfield, Missouri, what we find is that you have a group of people, I don't even want to call it elite, but there's a group of movers and shakers that participate in all of the community issues in that conversation, and it doesn't spread beyond that group. And I'm just wondering how, in this membership model, how do you reach out to those people that, like with the events, I like the idea of going to different parts of neighborhoods you might be missing, but I'm just wondering, when I saw that picture of one of the Texas Tribune events, it just struck me as it seemed a little homogenous, and I just wondered do you feel like you're hitting everybody you need to hit with the news events, the free events, and with the content on your website? Are you getting enough of everybody?
So for us, I mean, it comes down to also how you opt in and how you're self-selecting, because people come to the Texas Tribune Trent by way, a lot of times, of content. So if you're interested in public education or immigration issues, and we've started just recently a Facebook group, which has been quite successful really quickly. And in fact, our engagement officer, Facebook is trying to figure out from her how we build success so quickly in this type of engagement. And we're really listening to them, and some of the issues are kind of floating up, and then we're theming conversations around that. And our hope now is through engagement, that's what will lead to membership, email opt-in, getting more engaged with our brand, and then becoming a member.
Thank you so much for that question. If there are other questions in the audience or somebody wants to jump in with an example of how they share a resource or another magical way they're making money, please approach one of the microphones. Any of you got a burning question for each other? Or? Alex, tell us a little bit about how Press Patron plays with other advertising things on the page, how you manage the different design elements on the page. I saw you're kind of discreetly at the top and bottom, but talk a little bit about how you play with ad tracking services and things like that.
So it's up to the individual publisher. So some of our sites are completely ad-free, and I think that works really well for them and their mission. Others use Press Patron as part of like a pretty broad repertoire of different business models. So they might have sponsored sections, or they might have overall site sponsorship, and they try to make sure that those businesses or organizations really align with their values. And the ones that do it most successfully completely disconnect it from the editorial content. But yeah, so each site takes a different approach. Some have sponsored subsections, some have conventional display advertising. But what we do find is like the articles that might typically perform really well from a metrics perspective with display advertising, they're not the ones that are getting the highest number of donations in terms of the impact they're having with their community of readers. I think by shifting towards this sort of economics of generosity and trying to tap into that, it's really helping convert the mindset of news organizations. So it's changing, what are the incentive structures? Are you being driven by arbitrary metrics of audience size, or are you actually trying to figure out what your readers care about?
Excellent. There are many different ways to generate revenue on your sites, and I think design has a pretty powerful influence on that. Rob, you spoke about that really brilliantly, how you've streamlined your design, how you've moved the links to the little comments. I love that. Anybody else seen design make a difference? Anything else you'd want to add, Rob, about how design drives people to donations, gets people more engaged?
Well, there has been quite some research that one of the main things people judge information on, and you do yourself, like think about how if you see a conspiracy website, like you immediately can tell, right, by the design or the weird letter
It's all the
fonts
strings and photos.
Right. So design has to be like an integral part of your communication strategy, and also our sense is design should be focused on how do we foster trust. And also how do we align the kind of design we do with the kind of journalism we want to do. So everything in our journalism is about context. So our design is also about providing context to everything we do. Also, we are a very personalized platform. So you can see all our correspondents and everybody who works at the Correspondent personally. We have drawings of them you can relate to. That's also design kind of thinking. So yeah, and don't see design as an afterthought. Like in journalism, it's still very common to think of the story, write the story, and then have some designers or maybe even some developers come in, right? Present it. If you start with the designers and the developers, you'll get very different perspectives on how to tell a story, how to present a story, etc.
Great answer. Go ahead.
Coming back in terms of donations and membership campaigns, I think one of the key elements of your design should be ubiquity, so that there are multiple touch points across your site, and so that readers can discover it in a very natural way. I think some sites make the mistake of pursuing short-term gain. They might use bright yellow text and very intrusive page elements that kind of scream about their campaign, and it might result in a little bit of uptick, but the regular feedback we get from supporters is they get very annoyed by that. It might result in high churn rates. And the positive feedback that we get about the more subtle approach is that people feel a lot more empowered. They kind of converted naturally when they felt it was right, and they didn't feel like they were being begged. They felt like they were becoming part of the community.
Very interesting. If you've got a answer you want to, sure, and then we'll take the questions from the audience.
I really love the slide that you have about investing in development and developers and designers. I mean, if you're a digital news organization, digital is a core part of your identity, and there's just not enough investment in the infrastructure behind it. So if you're thinking about how you're going to get a casual reader to become an email subscriber to actually make it into your pipeline, you know, if you want to add in a plugin or something and your website is old and it hasn't been updated in years, like you don't even have a chance to compete at that level. So it's really important to constantly be investing in your website as much as the content itself.
Right. And also at the back end. So do the tools do what you want to do? So we early on, from the beginning, we decided we want to build our own CMS, because there are a lot of content management systems out there, but they're publishing oriented, right? They're pushing stories. And we wanted to have something more like a community management system where the conversation with journalists and readers is central to the whole tool. So it takes a lot of money and resources, but it's worth it, because every time we add a new feature that helps us do the journalism we want to do, it makes up for it.
Are you considering licensing that to other newsrooms or media organizations in journalism?
Yeah, we are. It works for us, but we don't feel comfortable licensing it yet because it's just not good enough. We can't service it well enough. We hope, like in somewhere between 6 and 12 months, we hope we'll get there. We only have 10 developers, which is not a lot. And especially to build a CMS like that, it's not nothing, actually.
Yeah.
And I suppose you'd also want to nurture their community and their strategy around how they use the tool, not just the technology, right?
Exactly. But at some point, we hope we could do that and foster membership models. We actually want it to be used for membership.
That's wonderful. I look forward to learning more about that. Let's get a question from the audience over here.
Hello. Hi. My name is Elena Carpio. I come from Venezuela. So Venezuela is a bit of an outlier, right? We're the first hyperinflation in the 21st century. There's currency exchange controls. So there are some endemic difficulties to maybe have a membership revenue stream. But I also wonder about culture. Is there a cultural dimension that maybe influences which revenue stream might appeal more to certain audiences depending on the region? And I realize that this is a very international panel, but also even for the Texas Tribune that might have a big Latino readership population, is there a cultural dimension to it? And I'm also interested in Janine's answer because Latin America.
Muy bien, gracias por la pregunta. Venezuela is a complicated market, but I have seen, some of the sites that I've worked in Venezuela started with a crowdfunding campaign that brought money from the U.S. and Venezuela, from the people who have left the country and sometimes have more money to bring back. And I know bringing it into the country is its own challenge, but I've seen some creative ways around that we can talk a little bit about afterwards. Why don't you guys go ahead and jump in and talk a little bit about the culture of donation, and if you're in a place where there's not a common culture of giving. In many of the Latin American countries we work with, that's something I hear from people. People aren't used to donating like in the US. They don't necessarily get tax deductions like in the US. If you have any insights about how you motivate people in the absence of some of those incentives, that might be helpful to her as well.
So for me, I'll jump in and say that Tribune, we really look at the population of Texas and the diversity of it and look to reflect that. An example is most of our population lives in urban areas, and so we've opened an urban market bureau in Dallas to cover that. And at the same time, you don't want to overlook anyone, because people who live outside the major markets, they have the same vote as we do here in Austin. So we're looking, it's really more from a kind of a solutions journalism kind of aspect. And so this November, we'll travel to College Station and do a 2-day event about the future of rural, really kind of looking at life in rural Texas and finding models to share, across those counties that help everybody. And so I think it's that, but it's also about the diversity of your own newsroom and company, and kind of understanding exactly where people are coming from, the stories that they are, looking for, the questions they need to be answered. We hired a community reporter. I think we were like the rest of the media after the presidential election. We kind of missed it. And so we look at journalism today as just not, top down, but now from the community up. And so we're listening more to the communities around Texas and listening to their questions. And that's driving a lot of our content.
You spoke about the very specific wording, about really walking people through something I actually saw from one of your colleagues. If you've never watched, and I recommend this to everybody that I work with in independent digital media, the crowdfunding video by Efecto Cocuyo in Venezuela, which has 2 women journalists talking about how there's a problem in the country. News is not getting out. Most of traditional media has been co-opted by the government, and there's a lack of news in our community. And it sets up the problem very well. And then it says, we are willing to do something about this. And it shows them in the street, talking to people, taking action, working on stories, cuts to some good black and white photos that shows the kind of work they do. And then in the end, it says, well, we can't do it without your help. And I think if there's a way to ask for support, and something I can teach to journalists, my experience with a lot of journalists is they either feel like they should never ask for money or support, or they feel like they should kind of desperately make a plea. Like, please help us or we'll die. And in my experience, people are more likely to support you if you do what Luz Melly Reyes and Laura Weffer did and say, there's a problem, we know it's a problem, it affects your life, we think we can solve it with your help, but we need your help to do it well, join us. That message I have seen work. And that video, which is about 2.5 minutes long and has English subtitles if anybody wants to see it, is on Efecto Cocuyo in their About Us page, and also on the SembraMedia website in the directory for them. So any other messages you've heard that really help move that needle?
Well, I totally agree. Like, safe journalism doesn't work. A lot, like...
It only works for journalists.
Yeah,
and
we
most of
are
us don't have enough money to save you.
Talking to yourself.
We are interested in saving our jobs, but not many people are. They want value out of it. But to come to the question that was from the audience earlier, I could give you the Dutch culture, where subscriptions have always been a key part of, because we're such a small country, so newspaper subscriptions were very common. You could deliver newspapers all over the country fairly easily. So that might help in turning people from newspaper subscribers to digital members or subscribers. But I do think, if you there's a universal kind of reason why people sign up and pay for journalism is when it just speaks to their concerns, their actual real concerns. And those concerns are not very hard to think of because we're all human beings. So, and we pretty much, generally, we disagree on a lot of things, but we care a lot about the same things: justice, fairness, health, treating others equally. So if you can somehow fit those more or less human values into your journalism at every space and point you can, you're going to get people wanting to support you or pay for it. It's not a algorithm thing. We have a great algorithm for 10,000s of years. It's called our moral compass, right? That's a great algorithm. We should listen to it way more often, I think.
That's wonderful.
I'd like to share at the Tribune, and this goes back to events and also just sharing content in real time. But I don't know how many of y'all remember the Wendy Davis filibuster. If you saw that anywhere on the planet, it's because the Texas Tribune was there live streaming it. And what we learned, I think Rodney Gibbs is in the audience today, is he championed a Kickstarter campaign for the Texas Tribune because we realized the power of real-time media. And so we went out there, we told everyone that this is exactly what we need. We want to start live streaming all of our events. Texas is a big place and we travel all over the place. And people suffer from time poverty. They're not going to travel with us everywhere. But if they want to experience these news moments in real time, then we ask for them to invest in us.
Yeah.
And they did. It was amazing. We went way past our goal. And then beyond that, my understanding too is the companies, the technology companies, wanted to support us as well. And so they kicked in. And it's incredible. And
April, I just have to compliment you for saying invest, not give, not donate. I mean, we are talking about donations, and I've heard that word a lot, but when you talk about investing in news, I think you take it to another place. We have time for one last question from the audience.
R.B. Brenner, the director of the journalism school here. Question for Rob. I really like your idea of having people be contributors, not commenters. But can you talk to people about sort of the practical level of that? Because if you do get 100 doctors, I used to be an editor at the Washington Post, and I think if we tried that model, we would be overwhelmed, and people might get cynical of like, I gave you information, you never followed up. How do you just manage that?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's a great challenge, but it's luckily it's a more of a design and development challenge than anything else. Just because 200 or 300 comments are overwhelming right now doesn't mean in a couple of years we can have like new tools to manage such input. But that is absolutely a challenge, especially when you get a lot of reader response and like the people who are most involved. They want an answer. They want an answer now, right? And if you don't answer them at all, or just give them an automated response, or you give them a response weeks later, they get annoyed. They said, I was interacting, I was involved, and you're not taking me seriously. So we are thinking a lot about building tools to make that process easier. So for example, we make in our backend, we make a Rolodex of people, doctors, teachers, historians, whatever. And we try to involve them in different ways. So it's not just sending you a comment or sending you an email. It's also read along with us or proofread in this Google Doc. Or we also explicitly try to make explicit what kind of response is best for us. So for example, we write posts like, this is the kind of email we would read or we would like.
Wow.
Instead of just
asking an open question.
Asking an open question. The more specific your questions are, the easier manageable the responses get.
Great. Fantastic answer. I want to thank Alex from Patron, Christina from the News Revenue Hub, April from Texas Tribune, and Rob from Correspondent.